It didn't start with a whisper. It started with a sentence, one single line buried inside a sealed envelope that has now ripped straight through the fragile balance of power inside the royal family. Because what was once dismissed as rumor has suddenly taken physical form, and that form is a letter. A private, handwritten letter from Queen Elizabeth II herself, allegedly hidden, protected, and now finally revealed. And according to sources moving dangerously close to the legal heart of Sandringham, this letter doesn't just express wishes, it commands them. And the moment Princess Anne's legal team placed that document on the table, everything changed, authority shifted, access froze, and most explosively of all, Queen Camilla was reportedly blindsided by a power she never saw coming. Because this wasn't a debate anymore, this was a directive from beyond the throne. The letter, described by insiders as written during the final winter months of the late Queen's life, was never logged into the official archives, never circulated among senior aides, and never mentioned during any succession briefings, which raises the first unsettling question: why was it hidden? And more importantly, who was it meant to protect or restrict? And the answer, according to sources who have seen fragments of its contents, is chillingly specific, because within its carefully composed lines lies a clause that designates the preservation of certain private spaces and personal collections under the exclusive guardianship of a single individual. And that individual is not the monarch, not the Queen Consort, but Princess Anne. Now imagine the atmosphere inside Sandringham when this surfaced, not as a rumor, not as a photocopy, but as a legally authenticated document backed by the same firm that has guarded royal secrets for decades. And suddenly, the sealing of use order that stunned the estate just days ago begins to make terrifying sense. Because this wasn't a spontaneous legal strike, this was a trigger, a pre-prepared response waiting for the exact moment when the line would be crossed, and insiders say that line was crossed when renovation plans tied to Camilla's office allegedly extended into areas explicitly protected under the late Queen's personal directive. And here's where it turns from tension into something far more explosive. Because the letter doesn't just outline protection, it reportedly includes a phrase that legal experts are calling an override condition, a rare mechanism that allows the designated guardian, Anne, to suspend any administrative action, regardless of who authorizes it, if it threatens the historical or personal integrity of those protected spaces. Which means that in one stroke of ink, a monarch's spouse can be legally sidelined inside a private estate if that condition is activated. And according to what's unfolding right now, it has been activated. The reaction inside the palace has been described as a mix of disbelief and controlled panic. Because for years, the assumption was simple. With King Charles III on the throne and Camilla at his side, the internal hierarchy was clear, the direction was set, and modernization was inevitable. But this letter fractures that assumption at its core, because it suggests that the late Queen didn't just pass down a crown, she left behind a safeguard, a silent boundary line that only one person could enforce, and that person has now stepped forward. But why reveal it now? Why wait until this exact moment when tensions over Sandringham were already simmering, when disagreements over archives, access, and control had been quietly escalating behind closed doors? And the answer, according to one insider, is brutally simple. Timing is leverage. And the letter was the ultimate leverage, held back until it could no longer be ignored, until the situation demanded not negotiation, but intervention. Because let's not forget the sequence that led here. The quiet audit of estate records, the sudden demand for inventory verification, the unexpected discrepancies in classification of royal items, the attempted lock changes that never happened, and now this, a document that redefines who gets to decide what happens inside one of the most symbolically charged estates in the monarchy. And when you line it all up, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a strategy that was unfolding step by step, piece by piece, until the final card could be played. And the most unsettling detail of all is what the letter might imply beyond Sandringham. Because if such a directive exists for one estate, what else might have been written? What other instructions could be hidden within personal correspondence that never entered the official system? And if those documents begin to surface, one by one, redefining authority in quiet but undeniable ways, then what we're witnessing right now might not be an isolated incident. It might be the beginning of a much larger unraveling of assumed power within the royal structure. Meanwhile, Camilla's position becomes increasingly complicated. Because this isn't a public confrontation she can address directly, it's a legal framework she has to navigate carefully, and every move she makes now is under the shadow of a document she reportedly did not know existed. A document that can halt projects, restrict access, and potentially expose deeper questions about how decisions have been made behind the scenes, and whether those decisions align with the late Queen's private intentions. And as the deadline tied to the current legal freeze draws closer, the pressure inside the palace is reaching a level that insiders describe as suffocating. authenticating. Because this is no longer about a room, or a wing, or even an estate. It's about control, legacy, and the terrifying possibility that the most powerful voice in the room right now belongs to someone who is no longer alive, but whose words have just returned with the force of a command that cannot be easily ignored. And the deeper this goes, the more it starts to feel like that letter wasn't just a protective gesture, it was a warning that was never meant to be ignored. Because what has quietly begun to surface behind the scenes is something even more unsettling than a single directive. It's a pattern of decisions, movements, and quiet authorizations that now appear to clash directly with the intentions written in that document. And as Princess Anne's legal team continues to dig, what they are reportedly uncovering is not just resistance, but evidence that certain boundaries may have already been crossed long before anyone realized the letter even existed. Because once that document was authenticated and placed into the legal framework surrounding Sandringham, it didn't just freeze the West Wing, it triggered a chain reaction, one that immediately forced a re-examination of everything connected to those protected areas. From inventory logs to security access, from archive transfers to digital classifications, and what began as a targeted legal move has now expanded into something far broader, almost investigative in nature, with insiders claiming that multiple discrepancies have been flagged within estate records. Discrepancies that were previously dismissed as administrative adjustments but now look far more deliberate under the light of this new authority. And then comes the detail that has reportedly sent a chill through even the most experienced palace aides. Because alongside the letter, there is said to be an attached reference, subtle, almost overlooked at first glance, to a specific collection of private materials that were never meant to be relocated, never meant to be reclassified, and certainly never meant to be accessed without the explicit approval of the designated guardian. And yet, according to sources close to the unfolding situation, at least one of those collections is no longer where it is supposed to be. Now pause there for a second, because this is where the story stops being about authority and starts becoming something much more dangerous. Because if protected items have been moved, even unintentionally, under a system that the letter now clearly overrides, then what we are looking at is not just a disagreement over space or control, it is a potential breach. And in the context of royal trusts and private estate law, that word carries consequences that ripple far beyond family tension, reaching into legal territory that no modern monarchy has had to confront in this way. Inside the palace, the atmosphere is reportedly shifting from confusion to calculation, because every advisor, every legal consultant, every senior figure now understands that this is no longer a situation that can be smoothed over quietly, not when a written directive from Queen Elizabeth II is. Now sitting at the center of it all, acting as both shield and sword, protecting what she intended to preserve while simultaneously exposing anything that might have strayed from that vision. And the question that is now being whispered in corridors that were once defined by silence is brutally simple. How far does this letter go? Because if one clause can override access to an entire wing, what happens if there are more clauses, more instructions, more conditions waiting to be invoked? And if those conditions begin to surface one after another, redefining authority in ways that were never publicly disclosed, then the balance of power inside the monarchy could shift in ways that no one outside those walls fully understands yet. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla finds herself in an increasingly tight position, because every move she makes now is being measured against a document she cannot openly challenge without appearing to defy the legacy of the very figure that defines the institution itself. And that creates a paradox that is almost impossible to navigate, because to push back risks public perception, but to step back risks internal authority. And in a structure where perception and authority are everything, that kind of pressure doesn't just build tension, it creates fractures. And then there's the king, King Charles III, caught in the center of a situation that is spiraling faster than anyone anticipated. Because this is no longer about choosing sides in a family disagreement, it's about interpreting the will, written or unwritten, of a predecessor whose influence has just re-entered the present in a way that cannot be ignored. And every decision he makes now carries consequences that extend beyond this moment, shaping not just how this conflict ends, but how future authority is understood within the monarchy itself. What makes this even more intense is the timing, because as the deadline approaches, the pressure is not just internal, it's symbolic, tied to a moment that was supposed to be about remembrance and unity, and instead it is unfolding against a backdrop of uncertainty, where every delay, every silence, every closed-door meeting only adds to the sense that something much larger is at stake than anyone is willing to say out loud. And just when it seems like the situation couldn't escalate any further, there are whispers, quiet, cautious but persistent, that the letter may not be the only document of its kind, that there could be additional correspondences, additional safeguards, additional instructions that have yet to surface. And if that is true, then what we are witnessing right now might only be the first wave of a much deeper revelation, one that could redefine not just who controls Sandringham, but how control itself is structured within the royal system. Because at the heart of all of this is a single, unsettling realization: the past is no longer silent. It is speaking, and it is doing so through words that were written with intention, preserved with care, and now revealed at a moment when they carry the maximum possible impact. And the question that now hangs over everything is not whether those words will be followed, but what happens if they already have been.